The following is a production of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. Bringing citizens and citizen soldiers together through the exploration of military history, topics, and current affairs. This is Pritzker Military Presents.
My name is John Schwan. I'm a board member of the Pritzker Library, and it's my pleasure to have a conversation with Mr. Richard Duchossois, who is a veteran of the Army in the Second World War and a very, very significant contributor to our community and a philanthropist, if I may be allowed to say that. So welcome, Dick.
Thank you, John, but I'm not that significant. I'm just another person.
We all are, but you are that significant. No. Dick and I have a lot in common. He doesn't know that. I went to Lane Tech and was born and raised in Uptown. Dick went to Morgan Park Military Academy when it was a military academy. Was raised in Beverly. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And we will get into where you went from there. Want to tell us a little bit about Morgan Park Academy?
Well, we had two high schools in Chicagoland area, Morgan Park High School and Morgan Park Academy. And I don't know why, but it's just always I was going to go to the academy. My brothers went to the academy, and that was just part of life. I think that did a great deal in changing my life for the future. It changed my life for college the short time I was there. And I think that I carried on an awful lot of the things into combat that I had learned at Morgan Park. I really didn't stop to think about it at the time, but when I look back, that's where I got my education, between there and the year and a half in college before I got called into the service. And the college, my college education was really starting in Normandy and finished up then, and I've had no more college.
Obviously, it worked well for you, so that's fine. Was Morgan Park a pure military academy? Did you live on the campus?
Well, we had boarders and we had day students. I was a day student most of the time. But if you're a day student, you still live like the military. The only thing is you didn't sleep there at night. You went home if you're in the community. And we lived in Beverly, and that was a short way from the academy.
So you basically had 4 years in high school of that discipline.
Yes. I learned my right foot from my left foot.
You learned how to march, etc.
Yeah. I learned a lot of other things there too. Maybe not too much in the grades, but I learned a lot about life.
I'm sure. And when did you get your first exposure to the military? Were you in the reserves?
Yes, some of us at the academy, you do certain things, and if you're an honors student, or not an honors, an honors school, we were eligible to get a second lieutenant commission in the reserve when we were 21.
Okay.
When the war broke out, it dropped down to 18, and I had just turned 19. War broke out in December, and I got called in January.
And where did you get called to as your first assignment?
My first assignment, well, we all had to go down from our area. Went to Camp Robinson in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was only there a few days. And then a number of us were assigned to the 610th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which was being formed down at Camp Hood, which is now Fort Hood, down in Abilene, Texas.
So you went in for that, to be in that specific unit?
I was in that unit until I got out. I never changed.
And they were forming that unit?
Yes, well, tank destroyers were just being formed at that time, and nobody really knew the full mission of tank destroyers. They'd experimented with similar type operations in Africa, and there was a number of different thoughts, just like the tanks. The infantry wanted to stay infantry, cavalry with the horses, and the artillery. And the Army was just in the process of turning over to a new way of fighting. When I went in, we still had, officers had the Sam Brown belt. You still wore the old campaign hat. it changed within a few months after I was in the service.
Understand. So you went into that unit as an officer,
Yes, sir.
and you were the what was you were a company commander, you were an executive officer, what was your title when you started?
Well, I was a second lieutenant when I went in. I was just another lieutenant in a group, and then you start out with training. You have a platoon, and then because we had a lot of people from the Oklahoma area, the Oklahoma National Guard, that were in that cadre, the rest of them were basically draftees that were civilians, you might say. We didn't fill out until we got down to another camp later on with all the draftees, and that group of draftees basically came from the East Coast, New Jersey, Brooklyn, and through that area. The first group were basically from Oklahoma.
And how many men were in the unit initially before you deployed?
I'm not sure. A company was 198 men. We had 3 companies of gun companies, 1 company of reconnaissance, which was a little bit less, and a headquarters company. That consisted of our entire battalion. We were never, in the beginning, when I say the beginning, for the first year, we were never at full capacity. We didn't even have the guns and things. We had artificial things or whatever we could get for training. The Army just wasn't equipped for war.
So you were, in essence, the headquarters operation, and then they filled the troops in for you.
Well, the cadre already had been established, that is the unit. We were the first fill-in group. Our officer group were the first officer group to get there. We didn't have all of the enlisted men at that time, a long way short of that, but they gradually started filtering in.
And you were the company commander, or
no, not at that time.
You were a platoon leader.
I was a platoon leader. Well, we sort of switched around. We did a little bit of everything. It started in training. We were doing training the troops. We technically had a job, but it was with different troops or different sections of the company.
So after college, you were drafted?
No, I was never drafted.
You were called up?
I had never signed up for the draft. I had my certificate to become a second lieutenant in the reserve when I was 21, and I got called in on that certificate.
When did you go to Little Rock?
I'm not sure when that was, but that was probably early March.
And you were activated when? Or you went in when?
Well, I was called in the service. Then you got 30, 60 days or whatever
to
get your uniforms and all the other things. And then I went in with a group of 8. We got on the train in Chicago. They sent us down to Little Rock. We didn't know where we were going. We were just on the train. Well, that was the Army.
That was the Army. They still, I don't think, tell you anything. So
well, it's pretty good. It's better than people say. You can kid about it, but it's pretty good, very good.
And then you went from there to Fort Hood?
Well, it was Camp Hood then. We used to joke about it. It was just being built. It was the only place in the world where we could stand in the mud up to our waist and have the dust blow in our eyes. We lived in tents.
Okay.
But there had been barracks, but there were other people in the barracks.
And your unit was part of what larger unit?
Well, at that time, we were just in the Army. And what we were assigned to as far as what part of the Army, I don't know, but everything had sections. Everything was training. It was the beginning of the war. There was a great deal of confusion. The top officers were changed quite frequently. Generally speaking, when we had a battalion commander, it was a regular Army officer that had been transferred to someplace. But usually they didn't stay too long because they went on to other things. As the Army got organized, we got organized.
So do you have a rough idea of what the size of the Army was then?
It was small. It was building, but it was building very fast. An example, the first day I was in, we got down to Little Rock, Arkansas, Cap Robinson. I was assigned to a company, which I didn't know, But I was to teach bayonet training at 8 o'clock the next morning. I'd never seen a bayonet. So the sergeant of that company, who'd been regular Army, we spent half the night learning bayonet training. I had my classes in bayonet training. I didn't see another one until after the war was over, and I saw that in a museum. So it was like Morse code that I had to take.
And what vehicles were you training in at that time? None?
Well, we had a few half-tracks. We had some Jeeps, and we had whatever trucks they could pick up. We weren't equipped with anything, really. We had whatever they could get.
Whose concept was it for the Tank Destroyer Battalion?
Well, I think from what I understand, and I'm not sure I understand everything, down in Africa, they had a lot of tank warfare down there. They experimented quite a bit with a 3-inch gun on the back of a half-track. The half-track, you know, that's...
Right, and they towed.
Yeah, and they started developing maneuvers and was working quite well. But like everything else in the Army, some of the senior officers, they thought it should be cavalry with the horses and other infantry, and no one really knew how to work with them. So it evolved more than anything else. And different battalions were trained a little bit different. And we got changing of equipment. We went from the half-track with the 75 millimeter or 76 millimeter gun on the back. We went then into M10s, which was a 3-inch gun on a vehicle that looks very similar to a tank, except it didn't have the heavy armor. Then we went to towed 3-inch guns. Then we went back to a 90 millimeter gun. We got the 90 millimeter gun after we got out of Normandy. I wasn't with the battalion at the time the 90 millimeter gun came to our battalion. I was in the hospital then, and when I got back out, we already had the 90 millimeters. They were brand new.
So were you trained on them, or you just went and were trained as you go, kind of on the job?
You're expected to know what it's about.
Okay. They had that expectation.
You train yourself at that. I was a company commander then.
Okay, so
and it's assumed that I knew.
It was assumed that you knew.
Yeah. You learn fast.
And your unit was in D-Day?
No. We fought in Normandy.
Right.
We didn't land with the troops. We were not in the invasion, but we were still fighting in Normandy. Our major, you might say, baptism was down at the counterattack going in to shut General Patton's Third Army from going on up into Brest. We were initially with the First Army, that was our assignment. Didn't do much fighting with them because they had already landed. Then we were assigned to the Third Army, which was General Patton's army, and we stayed with the Third Army until after the Bulge. So our heaviest fighting in Normandy was in the Argenton Falaise Gap. That's where we lost the most of our men, and we lost our battalion commander and some of our battalion staff. From there, we were reorganized to a great extent, because what was left of our operation, our reconnaissance company was broken up into 3 sections. The reconnaissance had 3 platoons. Each of the gun companies got one of those platoons. And from there on in, the 610th fought basically as individual companies assigned to individual parts of the division that we were assigned to. We were still a battalion and got services at a battalion, and we were called a battalion, but we fought as individual companies most of the time. And a company would generally be assigned to an infantry regiment, whatever division we were with.
Where did you see your first combat?
In Normandy, with the 80th Infantry Division.
So you were attached to them, and that was your first combat experiences?
Yeah, that was our first real combat experience. Yeah, that was the Argent. We were, you know, you're always, once you land, there's someone shooting at you. But our first really heavy combat was in the Argenton Falaise Gap.
Now, were you support, or were you, what was your job, really?
Well, we were supporting the 318th Infantry Division, or Infantry Regiment of the 80th Infantry Division. We were attached to them, supporting them. Well, as you may know, the Battle of Normandy, as troops tried to move out, was a mass slaughter. That was our heavy thing. That's where we had our heaviest fighting, in Normandy.
So when did they put you in they were in Normandy when you got with them?
Yes.
You got out of
No, they weren't. We got in before the Third Army did.
Okay.
The Third Army came in, and then we were transferred from the First Army to the Third Army.
And so you fought your way through the hedgerows and whatnot.
Not really. We were in them, but at that time, they were concentrating a little farther away from us. We were on the southern end of that thing, and the Germans were pushed back. At Avalanches, they counterattacked us. The 90th Infantry Division took the brunt of that. We moved through there. We're in that, but not really heavy. When I call heavy fighting, I call it when they're loading you down with artillery fire. You got a lot of men going on. The sniper and the little things on the side, you take those. That's part of what you have to do. But being new when when you first get shot at, you really don't know. You don't learn till you've had 2 or 3 days of being shot at. You change.
How did they utilize your guns in your unit? Were there tanks that you were attacking?
Yeah, every time we were with a different section or different division or different part of something, we were utilized different. Finally, it got to the point as a company commander, I would get what the division responsibility was do it, what their phase line, what they were trying to do and reach, and they say, here, you do it. When we were new, they didn't know how to use us. We didn't know how to work with them. They tried to tell us how we should be used, and you'd always say, yes, sir, then you'd do what you were supposed to do.
Or what you decided to do.
Well, you know, we trained one way, they trained another way. Our people knew it, they remembered it. We had a good outfit.
But you knew what you were supposed to do.
Well, in a way, when you go to combat, it isn't one shoe fits all. And what the training taught you, it's like a quarterback in a football game. You call the audibles because it changes. There is no set pattern. You have to use your noodle. You have to understand where their enemy is coming, what they're trying to do, and you have to be there to get them out of the way and not be noticed. You have to outsmart it. It's a matter of game in your mind.
Did the Germans have tanks at that point?
Oh yeah, they had a lot of tanks.
So you were confronting the tanks.
Well, yes, sometimes we would be fighting tanks. Sometimes we would be working with the infantry going through a village where maybe the Germans had the crossroads, all the machine guns and so forth at the corner and their spot. So what we would do is blow holes in the sides of the building so the infantry wouldn't have to go through there. They'd go through the holes we blasted inside the building and stay away from where the Germans had their guns at. We did everything we could. None of that stuff was in the textbook or in training.
Right.
You just did it because it had to be done.
So you were making the decisions is the point.
To a great extent.
To a great that I'm trying to.
That was a company commander in the tank destroyers really had to make his own decisions. The regiments that we were with and the battalions that sometimes we were supporting, they were infantry. They had infantry tactics. We had to sort of clear the way for the infantry. And then when they finally gotten into their positions, we had to have defensive areas, which we didn't like. We wanted to keep moving. But when they had to stop, we had to protect them from tanks coming in.
And did that occur frequently?
Always.
Always.
That's what you do. That's our job.
So always the German tanks would be around. And
they were always around, yeah.
And they would attack all the time.
Well, there's different ways to attack. You attack sometimes by the artillery coming in and blasting you. You attack sometimes by their tanks sitting back in the woods and sort of waiting for you to come there. sometimes they're coming at you, sometimes it's just infantry. Every situation, I can't really think of too many, you might say skirmishes or battles or things we went through. They were absolutely identical to the other. In concept, they were pretty much the same, but actually the way they evolved, it was different. You had to think on your feet.
What type of intelligence reports was available to you?
Well, they would come down from division. What we would do in my company, we would send our own patrols out. We relied on the information we got, that we developed ourselves. If we're going to be going someplace, our scouts would go out. Then, like anything else, you have to have complete confidence in your people. My company, we had the very best of everything, but still I'd like to go out with them so I could better understand what they were telling me when they came back. Because sometimes my eyes would see it different than their eyes would. It's not that they're giving me the wrong story, it was just different. Sometimes I'd see what I had to do, where the troops and the tanks, destroyers could move, where would be the best place to shoot from. They wouldn't always see the same spots. They would look at what their mission was, what are we running into? My job was to find out how we're going to get through it.
Did you have a lot of contact with the infantry company commanders, or was it at the battalion level?
Both. Sometimes you'd work very close with the infantry, the company commander, sometimes even with their platoon leader. Well, we would do what we had to do. And when you've been in combat for a while, it becomes automatic. You start thinking that way. That's your job. And there is nobody that tells you, you move here, you move there. They tell you, you know what your mission is, you know what ground you're going over, you theoretically know what's in front of you. You try to find out, you get it from different sources. Then to an extent,
so
you do what you have to do.
You made your own decisions.
Well, to a great extent you made. They would tell us what we had to do. But generally speaking, we had to decide how we're going to get it done. That was our job.
Did you have specific targets or cities that you were supposed to take, or villages?
Yeah, but everyone was different.
Okay.
Everyone was different. Which they would tell us what was in there. They would tell us what infantry we have, what the engineers would be doing. Now here's what we're doing. You're part of it. Work with the closest troops.
And at that point, what type of German soldier were you in combat against?
Well, we ran the full gauntlet. In Normandy, through the Argenton Police Gap in Argenton, they were very, very good, top troops. As the war progressed later on, we ran into good and we ran into bad. After the Bulge, you'd see some of the older men with bicycles and so forth. You knew that they were running out of men and running out of material at that time. And you knew that they weren't going to be good soldiers. You knew you could push faster, you could scare them. And General Patton always had the idea, is you keep pushing them and never let them turn around and look back. And that's how we went across France. Then we got held up at the Moselle because there was other fighting up north, and they took the equipment and I got shot down there. And I was in the hospital, between Moselle and the Metz. I was shot during the crossing of the Moselle River. And I didn't get back until after Metz had fallen.
And you were at the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes. We were headed due east. And we had been in contact, my company had been in contact with the enemy. And then we were finally given a rest period. I guess we had been most of us had been maybe a day and a half without any sleep or anything. So finally we got a chance to be brought back to get re-equipped. Got our security out. And I asked our people, shut off your radios, just keep one open, I'll be in contact with you. And battalion got word that we're to move directly north and move quick. Well, I had my radio off and they came and got me. I would say within 2 hours after we had started to get our rest period, we headed toward the Battle of the Bulge. We were right on the front of Patton's
So
army.
you were at the front of the battle.
Well, we went a long time without sleep. So you learn to sleep while you're walking. You learn to sleep for 15 minutes here, a half hour there. You never get more than an hour, hour and a half sleep at that time.
So when you were in the Battle of the Bulge, you were really absorbing the initial shock from the Germans.
No, we didn't have the initial shock. We got the Battle of the Bulge was going on when we got up there.
Okay.
We hit them from the south.
Okay.
It was the first army that took the initial shock. And those were basically new troops that hadn't had combat experience when the Germans hit. They were very smart, and where they hit, it was our weakest part of the whole front. It was sort of a rest area, if you'd call it that, an area to get used to hearing the guns go up. That's where they hit, and that's why they got it so far.
Okay. And that was in the winter?
It was cold.
Yeah.
It wasn't too cold when we first moved, but it got cold after. I understand it was one of the coldest winters they had on record.
And you really were in combat against the Germans' best troops.
Yeah, they had the best troops. They had good troops. I won't say it's the best. We were better.
Understand. Now, at that point, did they have their Tiger tanks?
Yeah.
So they had all the heavy stuff.
They had the best there was. They put on their point. Yeah.
Just as a minor aside, did you ever get to meet General Patton?
No, I saw him a couple times.
Did you?
But we knew who he was. We worshiped the ground he walked on, because we moved forward. We were so proud of what we were doing. We were at a place called New Ulm, which was way east of, I think it was New Ulm. No, it wasn't New Ulm. I can't think of the name of the town now. But we were way east of Paris when Paris fell. We were down on the Moselle when we read in the Stars and Stripes how the British had taken the town that we had left.
So that was Montgomery?
Yeah, well,
with the Brits?
He was a good commander too, but they were different. You know, you can't say one was good and one was bad, but there were differences of opinions as to what your tactics should be and how you fought. Patton was very, very aggressive, and we were too, because he built that into us. We didn't develop it, he did, and he taught us.
So you were totally imbued with his spirit.
Well, let me say this. When you're successful at something, you start saying it works. You get cocky. We knew that we were the best. He told us we were the best, and we were the best, and we were the fastest. And I think history has proven that.
No question. Did you move with American tanks, or you were on your own?
Sometimes we had American tanks with us, and sometimes they were ahead of us. Each area and each combat that we had, every fight, you might say, was different. Now, when we got down in the Moselle, we didn't have any other tanks, American tanks with us, but other places we did.
So you, again, and I'm trying to equate my experiences in Vietnam with yours of kind of being on your own.
Well, to a great extent. I was back at the 70th anniversary of D-Day, and I was with a small group of people, and they had some just really wonderful guides that were showing us on how they landed and so forth. And I should have kept my mouth shut, but I didn't. After there was one guide told us how great it was, I asked him, well, are you talking now about high tide or low tide? He looked at me. He didn't know what I was talking about. I said, oh yeah, well, I can't tell you. Because if it were low tide, you know, you got about 300 yards to cross that beach, and but you're under fire for longer. If it's high tide, you had about 50 yards, and the Germans just shoot. So it made a big difference as to how you went across. But what I really learned in there, that many of the guides and many of the people that write about it, I could, just reading, I could tell, were they talking to a private? Were they talking to a corporal? Were they talking to the platoon leader? Were they talking to the company commander or a battalion commander? Because each of the people there, like in any part of the war, in any other part, you had different responsibilities. And as I would look at as a company commander, I'm trying to get my strategy, I'm trying to move my troops, and so I don't have time to think about some of the other things. As a fellow in the tank, or in a tank destroyer or an infantryman, a foxhole or a place you can't see, he's worried about his particular small unit. So the stories that you hear depend upon what the rank was and the responsibility of that rank that would tell you how the battle went. In other words, what I think, and I hadn't really thought of this till a few years back when we were reminiscing about some of the things, you can tell what the responsibility was of the people that were giving you the story, if they were a buck private in a foxhole, or if they're a company commander out doing his reconnaissance and moving forward. It's that simple. And I had never thought of that until I got back to Normandy.
Well, it's an utterly personal experience, isn't it?
Well,
War is...
I had a year and a half of college, and when people ask me where I went to college, I just say, in Europe. They start naming the different card games. Nope, 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 nope. So finally they give up asking. But that was the end of my education. I had half a year at the University of Chicago, but I wasn't a very good student in high school, and I was getting straight A's in that business school for a half year. You know, I know as much as they know as far as the little parts of the business that we have, because business and fighting and a war are very, very closely related, very closely related. And neither one can you use the textbook. There is no such thing in either a one shoe fits all. You get the tools, but you have to know how to use the tools. Some use them one way, some use them another. Some are successful, some aren't successful. It's how you interpret what your responsibility is and how well you're going to carry it out, and what other people around you, what is their capability. It's like risk. Your risk isn't the mission. The risk is the people that you have completing that mission. And that's the one thing I learned, which I carry through to today.
No question. So you really were out there on your own, basically.
Well, you were never really on your own.
No, but you're your own scout.
Well, to a degree.
You were your own intelligence gatherer.
Well, we always got the intelligence reports, but after a while I never really believed them, because I didn't know there was some staff sergeant or an officer back there. Yeah. We developed a way in our company. We said, don't expect what you didn't inspect. And that happened to me down on the Moselle. I didn't do that, and we paid for it. Didn't lose any men, but the Germans lost a lot. They came in at the wrong time. And I've carried that thing through. I thought, gee, that's pretty smart of me to think of that. I got back home and everyone used that same expression. You have to.
Absolutely.
It's too normal.
What was your relationship with your men? Obviously, well, let me preface that by the story of them coming to get you out of the hospital and bring you back to the unit.
Well,
that shows immense respect as an infantry officer.
I would like to think it's respect. I think they didn't always have that. I was the youngest in the company. Everyone was older than I was, the men and the officers. And behind my back, they called me Little Napoleon, because I had learned in military academy, you have to have the discipline. If you got enough discipline, it becomes automatic, your thinking. But when we got to combat, one of the companies, our company commander, was the most popular captain in our group, but they always had the highest AWOL, highest VD rate, and all the other things. Under first fire, they broke. I didn't lose a man. From then on, they almost surrounded me. I think it was more the respect of knowing that we had a job to do. We knew how to do it and we'd get it done. And if we did it right, we wouldn't lose many men. If we didn't have the discipline, we didn't have the tightness, we were going to get our people shot up, because no one would know really what they had to do. And we took a great deal of pride in being able to be the first on there, because we always figured second isn't good enough. There is no second. You're alive or you're dead. No, that's how it went. And our men got that in their head. We had discipline that was just absolute discipline. And you were never questioned on anything. Every now and then you get some replacements, but that soon gets straightened out.
How did you get wounded?
Well, we were overrun pretty bad, and I had to send my driver back. I thought I'd try to hold off one part of the group coming through, and I was there alone trying to spray the field where they were coming in. And as you're running or shooting with your Tommy gun, you're always looking a little bit to your right to see where it is. I saw the guy who was maybe 30 yards away from me. I couldn't get around fast enough, so he shot me. I just wasn't fast enough.
You were fast enough. You're doing this interview.
Well, yeah. It isn't knowing and being smart. It's knowing what the instincts are. And the longer you're fighting is just like the longer if you're an accountant, the more work you do, you learn it, and things become automatic. If you stop to think about, are you going to shoot that guy or not shoot him, and you jump or so you go down, you're dead. You have to do it by instinct to a great extent. And the longer you're in combat, the more you get that way. Toward the end of the war, because we were a pretty good operation, and we didn't have a battalion commander, ours had been gone, they would send different people in, so on their 201 files, they would have their command. Well, you'd see somebody come over from the state, a lieutenant colonel was usually a battalion commander, and they hadn't been in combat, and we had for a long time. And when the music started coming our way, we would know when to duck and when not to duck, if it was going over, come in. But when they heard that stuff coming, they took shelter. We just sort of stand around and watch. But it wasn't that we were brave. It was that we were used to knowing it. You learn to survive. And you learn when you should duck and when you shouldn't duck.
How many men did you have in your company at most?
Well,
I know it varied depending on the contact you were in.
We started, when we first hit combat, we were with the 3-inch towed guns. We had 189 men in a company, and had a company commander and 4 lieutenants. Each platoon had one, and then you had an executive officer. When we went into the M36s, we dropped about 156 men because we didn't need as many.
How were you resupplied?
With men?
No, well, both, yeah. With men and with ammunition, food, etc.
Well,
what was the logistics like?
You always had a headquarters section, and the way we operated in the company I commanded, we had a lieutenant back there. It was his job to see that we had the fuel first. We had the equipment and ammunition second, and then the food and other accessories third. And I would tell him what we needed, when we needed. I wouldn't have to tell him, he'd know. You get to know. That's his job. I tried not to over micromanage, if you could call it. They didn't use that word then, but when you give a man the responsibility and you watch him carefully, if he's carrying out that responsibility right, you don't try to tell him to do too many things. They start doing what I would do. I'd get my instructions and so forth. If I didn't think they were giving the right ones, I did what I wanted. He had to do the same thing. I didn't know every move that he's going to make. I didn't know who would be shooting at him. He had to call his signal as he saw it on the ground. And I think that's what most American troops did. The German troops, I don't think they went that way. They were so disciplined that if someone said jump, they wouldn't ask why, they'd just say how high. That's the discipline they had. That was good for them, because everyone in their operations were that way. Our guys weren't. The Americans want to think for themselves, and you have to let them think for themselves, but you have to make sure that they can think in the right direction. If they're people that can't do it, maybe they'd be better off in some other operation or out of the company. We were very, very fortunate when we had people that really couldn't quite make it. We were able to get them moved and transferred out. So we had pretty good guys, very good.
So how many replacements did you have on a regular basis?
I don't know.
But not many. You were able to hold your unit intact for most of the.
Well, we would. If we were short, we would tell battalion, our headquarters were short. they would put in the requisition to wherever the replacement depot was. Then they'd ship guys up to it. And if we were short in the first platoon, then some in the first platoon or the second, wherever they had to go. But we very seldom got anything but privates. We got some second lieutenants. Didn't like them. Well, most of them that we were getting at that time were really good people, but they had been enlisted men and gone to OCS, the Officer Candidate School, and got a second lieutenant commission in 90 days. They hadn't had combat experience. And experience, the longer you're there, the longer you're going to survive. The shorter you're there, the shorter the time you're going to survive. But if you're in a command and you haven't learned those things, you aren't going to be able to give the right commands and take care of your people. So we tried to keep switching around within our battalion from one company to another, if necessary, to make sure that the 3 platoon leaders of the tank platoons were experienced people. We didn't like to put a new man there, but sometimes we didn't have any choice.
Well, it had to be very tough on a new man when you're moving all the time.
They don't have time to think about it, you know.
That's
when they're
true.
shooting at you, you move.
That's true.
And if you've got a mission to get your guys there, you know what your mission is, you do it. Combat and business are very, very similar. You can go to business school, learn all the book learning, but if you don't know how to translate that into what you have to do, it's worthless. All business schools do is they give you the training, the tools to work with. And you have to know how to use those tools. In combat, you know all the things to do with your gun and the attack and so forth. You know the tactics, but when you're on the battlefield, everything changes. You have to know how to use the things you had learned before and put the different combinations together. If you don't, you're going to lose. It's very simple. The two are very much alike.
And you were in this combat role for a couple years?
Well, I don't know when you call combat world and training. Sometimes training was more difficult than combat.
I understand that.
You know.
Yeah.
You know.
And I liked it better in the jungle.
Well,
I didn't like that other.
You take what you can get.
I did not like the other stuff. Did your vehicles that you used, did they change in the course of your combat experience?
Yes. We went in Normandy. We had half tracks with towed 3-inch guns. We down in Nancy at the Moselle crossing, the battalion switched over to 90mm guns on mobile tanks. Our tank destroyer looks very much like a Sherman tank. The difference basically is a tank destroyer doesn't have much armor. It will turn a 50 caliber machine gun, so when you get hit by another tank, it goes right through you and takes out whatever is in there. In a tank, which has a thick armor plate, generally the German armor-piercing ammunition can burn through that armor on one side, but the molten steel from where it's burning through is scattering around inside the tank, and it takes out most of the tank people. So we might get hit and it go right through us, but if it's a fuel tank or something, then of course you're going to be on fire. But if it doesn't, it goes straight through. And that's the difference. And we're faster because we're lighter. We don't carry as much weight.
And you were able to destroy Tiger tanks?
Yes, with the 90mm we could. With a 3-inch gun, if you hit them in the spots, and that is between their track and the other, there's weak spots in there. Or if you could get them, if they're going up a little bit of a mound and you could get them in the belly, you could go through them. But other than that, it would bounce off. Now, when you had the lighter things like some of the tanks had, their guns would bounce off of them. The Germans had pretty good armor. In fact, it wasn't pretty good, it was darn good. And you had to know where to hit the tank. Now, when it's moving, you don't have much choice in that. And when it's out at a distance, you're lucky if you hit them in the sponson. Well, you have to give those tankers just a whale of a lot of credit. They never turned back. They were good. and they'd stay there. They'd sacrifice their tank if they thought they could get a German tank. They were good. We had the best. I think that's one of the reasons why we could move so fast, why Patton kept them moving. Our guys knew what they were doing.
Well, you had to be if you're confronting someone who could destroy you.
Well, that's just it. They could destroy us, and we knew that. It was either them or us. And as Patton used to say, he didn't like the guy that was going to give his life for this country. He wanted you to kill the other damn guy so you could kill more people later. And our people believed that because it was true. He didn't tell us one thing that wasn't true. And his way and his tactics are what won the war in our area. I don't know what the other armies did because we weren't with them.
So his style, how would you compare his style of leadership to yours?
To mine? Well, I think all of us that had the privilege of fighting with General Patton adapted to his. We had no choice. But his was right, and we knew it was right. We tried our very best. And I think if you build the morale up, you know you're on a winning team, you move ahead a lot faster. And we knew we were on a winning team. We knew we were the best. We knew that we could kill more Germans than they could kill us if we did what he told us to do. And it was in our mind. There was never any question about it, and that's how we reacted.
Was he visible to you?
Yeah, we would see, I wouldn't say frequently, but we would see him or his people a fair amount. And what he did, he had regimental commanders and battalion commanders that got up front. His top officers would be there.
So he was leading from the front.
Yeah, he was. And when you got a special set of orders coming down, you knew that he knew what he was doing. That they didn't all come down to a bunch of staff people. They came from him, or we assumed they had come from him. They originated with him.
So your belief in him made you more effective.
Yeah.
And your men's belief in you is what made you effective.
Well, is it any different than, say, a football team? You've got a quarterback that you know when he throws a pass, where it's going to be, and you've got confidence in him. You're just a spirit, I guess. It's a way of life. But if you've got a quarterback that's missing and so forth, calling the wrong plays, you don't have confidence. You don't play your hardest. We fought our hardest because we were fighting for a cause. Believe me, everyone that was in that war fighting wasn't fighting for liberty and everyone at home. We had an overall mission we had to win. And if they were going to be taken care of, we better take care of what he told us to take care of.
He doesn't really get credit for that because of a lot of the...
He got credit from us.
Yes, which is the only place it counted.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right?
I guess you're right. I didn't look at it that way.
Well, I just think in terms of, you know, the movie and all that other phony crap.
Yeah.
You're the testament to Patton.
Well,
and your men are the testament to you because they did what you said.
Yeah, I think that if you really looked at what happened in the war, and you talk to the people from different armies, different divisions, and so forth, those who were most aggressive, division commanders, regimental commanders, or even the army commander that were aggressive people. I think in business, if you have your CEO as an aggressive, successful guy and pushing forward, and your company's a success, your people all the way down the line, they become better people, and they become it. You take on the personality, I think, of your leaders. I think.
I
don't think you try to do that. It just happens.
That's true. And you then, when did the war end for you?
Well, we were with another army at that time. We were halfway between, can't think of the name of the town now, where all the beer is, where do they have the beer fest?
Oh, Munich.
Munich. We were halfway between Munich and the Alps. We were going down there. It was May, I'll never forget it. It was snowing in May. We had snow. But we knew it was over about a week before because most of the guards at the German camps and so forth had left. They were afraid of the Russians, and the inmates kept coming back, and they were just such a horrible sight. And if they weren't being guarded and they were coming back, there weren't many people, Germans in there. A few diehards, but nothing big. So the war really, for us, ended, maybe a week, 10 days before the armistice was signed. We got word to cease fire maybe it was 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. By noon, we were heading back north again. There was no jumping and happy days and one thing another. We were tired. We were worn out. All we wanted to do was get a place to lay down and sleep a little bit. And get our, well, first we had to take care of our guns and our equipment, and then we would sleep. But we wanted rest more than anything else. There was no big celebration where we were. Our people didn't celebrate.
When you were in combat for about 2 years?
Oh, no. No, the war didn't last that very long, really. We were in combat from July till the following May.
Okay.
The war was over in May, and it started in June, but the June before.
So 1 year at least.
Beg pardon?
1 year.
Roughly. But that was long enough.
I was going to say.
I wasn't in that long. I had hospital time.
Not much.
Well, yeah, but at least you slept. You learn to go. You learn that the body can get along without much sleep. All you have to do is keep the adrenaline up. If your adrenaline's up, you can keep going.
Well, you can doze off, can't you?
Beg pardon?
You can take a 10-minute break, can't you?
Yeah.
And nod off.
Well, you can't take it at your leisure. You can take it when they tell you
when
you
they
can.
tell you can, absolutely.
You know, when things die down a little bit, you can sort of rest your head a little bit.
And you saw the difference in the German troops? They went to the old people on bicycles as you...
Yeah, toward the end of the war, we really weren't... After the Bulge, we weren't really fighting against any really hard... There are always some diehards. There always will be on there. But they weren't always troops. Some of them were civilians fighting for their homeland. But even before the Bulge, because a lot of the good troops have been pulled back and they get ready to go into the Bulge. And we still saw some of the bicycle people. When you start seeing bicycle people, older people, you know that the better troops are either getting ready to attack someplace else or they're quitting. They don't have them. So you can tell about where you are by what the troops are, how well they're trained, those in front of you.
So you made it all the way to Munich, and then it was over.
Well, after Munich, there wasn't much at Munich. From down there, I guess if you're brand new coming into it, what little stuff we had, you think was pretty bad. But you're sort of used to people shooting at you. You get used to it. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. You never get used to it, but you learn to live with it.
How do you evaluate the Germans as soldiers?
Depends upon which troops you were with. In the Bulge, we knocked out a Tiger tank. It was from the Hermann Göring division. Mm-hmm. That was the division that was, for the parades and all that. And I had never been in a Tiger tank, and I looked at it, got up there, and of course the whole crew was dead. There were 3 guys and 2 gals. The big blonde people on there, very attractive. That was the first time I saw women in a tank. But the German army toward the end had women soldiers too. I think a lot of people didn't understand that.
No, I didn't either.
I don't know what all they did, but that's not surprising because they're running out of men. But think about this. We as veterans had a job to do in fighting, but back home, everyone had a job to do to support those that were fighting. So we get credit for a lot of things. The credit really belongs to the women, the truck drivers, the people that were developing munitions and doing all those things. We never could have won the war if we hadn't done the people back here. Or look at Higgins building the landing craft. Look at Kaiser building the Liberty boats. Look at the people that were doing it. If they weren't there, we wouldn't have been where we were. So it isn't just the veterans. We were sort of, you might say, the sign out in front. They're the frosting on the cake.
You were the
and
point.
they were the cake.
You were the point.
Well, yeah, you could
tip of the
say
spear.
that. But it was a whole nation working together that won that war. It wasn't just the veterans, but you can't really talk to everyone on there, so you have to have someone that's in front, and that happens to be us because we were in the Army or the Navy. We were in uniform. Most of the others weren't. And we used to figure there were somewhere near 30 civilians behind every guy that was on the front, making the munitions, the food, all the uniforms, everything that had the vehicles. How could we have done anything without them?
The Army travels on its stomach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that they had, they call it the Red Ball Express. The truckers that brought the food and stuff up from the boats, and they brought it up to us, and without them we couldn't have survived. We got credit, and they didn't, in many areas, but they're the ones that kept us going. And they were magnificent. Those truck drivers would drive and drive and drive in those convoys. They went through all sorts of things on there to get the food and munitions, and they did a magnificent job. Without them, we couldn't have done anything.
Did you have different weapons as time went on?
Well, just our big weapons.
Just the big weapon.
From the Toad to the 90 millimeter. But other than that, we didn't have any weapons changes.
Does the military, to your knowledge, use tank destroyer units?
No, the tank destroyer units were all dissolved after the war.
Okay.
There are no tank destroyer units. What they have really done is taken what was a tank destroyer unit and put some of that equipment into the Army, into the infantry, where they had anti-tank weapons, a little 57 millimeter gun, the pop gun. So you're using more of a tank destroyer in that and replacing them.
Yeah, we had the M72 laws.
Yeah. Well, I think you had tank destroyers over where you were.
Did we?
Yeah. And there are tank destroyers in Vietnam. But
they were attached to our units.
They were attached. When you're in special troops, no one really pays any attention to you to any aspect. They're talking about the division. The press wants to know where the division or where the Army's going. The special troops, that's their job. That's like, why do you have shoelaces in your shoes? You have to have them, but who talks about shoelaces?
No, you had. What was the morale like as you went in?
Well, yeah, I think I started when we first heard about Pearl Harbor. It was just before our mid-semester, or before Christmas exams. Walking up Sunday morning to the library, which normally we didn't do, but we're getting ready for exams because then we're going to be going home for Christmas. And we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Our first reaction is, where the hell's Pearl Harbor? We didn't know. But by the end of the day, we knew. And everyone knew it. I think that was pretty much a feeling, not just with us, but throughout the country. Where is Pearl Harbor? Because we knew, and the politicians knew, about all of the fighting going on in Europe. We knew nothing about Pearl Harbor. We knew it was a war in Europe, and everyone felt sorry, but I don't think people really were prepared for war. And I think the President Roosevelt at that time was waiting until the people would get prepared and have to fight. It just seems that way. Then when we once got into it, everyone got into it full bore. Because we had a draft at that time, and there was hardly a family in the country that didn't have a son, a daughter, or a relative in there. And everyone tried to support it. Then when the war did break out, if you saw somebody in civilian clothes, you'd almost think they were a slacker. And the country came together as a team, and everyone worked. And the draft wasn't something you avoided. It was something, if you didn't get into the Army, you're a slacker, into one of the services I call the Army, but with the Navy, the Marines, or Merchant Marines. They all took a vital part in the actual combat of the war. But those at home had to supply those that were fighting. And they worked just as hard as those that were fighting. And a lot of those that were fighting would have preferred to be home, but they were drafted. So, and once you got into it, the whole country was there. And you knew that the people home were supporting you. Your war in Korea and the war in Vietnam was entirely different. You had no one supporting you. So you had a different attitude then. So we had a job to do. Most people in the country understood that we had a job to do, and they did it. And I don't think anyone really, well, I don't say anyone, but the bulk of the people, you'll always have some that are against it. The bulk of the people, though, were in the spirit of the war. I shouldn't say spirit, but we're working for it.
No, I think that's true. That's true. It was the spirit.
Well, it was, because you had the signs all over, you know, a slip of the lip, and then the war
Loose
bonds.
lips sink ships. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the war bond posters and everything. We didn't see many of those because we were in camp, and you just didn't get home a lot.
How did it change, and how do we get it back?
I don't know. From what I saw when I was in school and that, we didn't pay much attention to the war. It was someone else's war. I think now we've gone through several different generations, and I think that the thinking has changed. Just like you'd go from jitterbug to Woolsey to something else, the culture has changed with each generation. I believe with the communications we have now, we have radio, television, and all the internets and everything. There's the people as a whole are better educated because of the communications that we have. Those that are against something get their message out. Those that are for something get their message out. And you have a lot of conflict in there because of communications and our .com industry, you might call it. So to make a comparison would be unfair. I think if the people back in the 30s, in the early part of the 40s, had the same communications, maybe they'd be thinking the same. If the people today were back then without that communications, it would probably be the same. If we have somebody that gets shot or there's a riot in XYZ or halfway around the world, within 30 minutes, it's on TV. It would take 30 days probably before the newspapers had picked up on that. Our communications are so great today that it changes the whole culture that we live in around the world, around the world. I don't think you can make a comparison. People are people. They're going to go with what they see and think. And we give a different textbook now than we had then.
Do you feel patriotism in our country now?
I feel there's a lot of it coming up. I always figure that there's 20% of the people that are against everything, 20% are for everything, and 60% haven't made up their mind. I'm a trustee at the World War II Museum down in New Orleans, and we have just been overswamped with people down there. And from the reaction I see of people going down there, they're beginning to understand that freedom isn't free, that you have to fight for it. And maybe we don't have the freedom that we think we have. And too often, because of television and other means of communication, we're listening to the one that yells the loudest instead of what the reality is. And I think in England and here and in other countries around the world, the people now are beginning to say, hey, we were always listening to the top, but no one's listening to us. And I think that's what's changing the culture of the world. England had it, you know, they got, Germany has it, we have it, and other countries are getting it. The people that are really making the world go round are now getting vocal. They hadn't been vocal before, just in small groups, but now it's spreading. So we're going through different phases. Now, I'm not old enough to remember what happened back in the Revolution. But some people think I am, but I'm not.
I think I'm old enough, Dick, so it's okay.
Okay. But, you know, you can compare that to a degree of what we had now. We had some real strong patriots, but we also had some revolutionists, too, that were completely the other way. So, conscientiously, we haven't really changed that much. The weather has changed. It's winter now and you're wearing a top coat. You'll be wearing shorts in the spring and in the summer. It's just how it goes.
When you got home, what did you do? What was your attitude? Just kind of describe that period in your life.
Well, I don't know. I guess I wanted to go back to school, but I couldn't afford it. My oldest son was a year and a half old, and I just saw him. And they had a GI Bill of Rights, but I figured that unless I earned my way through school, I didn't want to borrow any money on there. My father-in-law, when I found out, he had a small railroad freight car repair shop out in Chicago Heights, and he had just bought his brother-in-law out, and he said, "You're going to work for me." So I didn't have much choice. I had to get food and take care of my family. So I started working. We had 38 men out there, and most of it was out in a field. So I started working for that. We built the company up to, it was one of the largest manufacturers of railroad freight cars in the world. And we were probably one of the most profitable ones in the world, but we built up over a period of time. It got to a point where Grandma died, Grandpa died, my wife had died of cancer. And you know, in a family company, when you're the outsider, everything doesn't always work as good as it should be. I just had my brother-in-law and myself were there, and I ended up buying the company, and then we built it with my family the rest of the way. Then when we bought we were strictly in manufacturing of railroad freight cars. We weren't doing repair work then. It was the complete car. Then after my wife died, I had never been to a Kentucky Derby. And I went down there. I ran into the former president of Arlington and the executive vice president. The company was then owned by Madison Square Garden. They told me it was going to be sold, and they were putting together a syndicate to buy it. Would I join? I wanted nothing to do with it, but anyway, after the fifth race or so, I said 10% and no more, and I forgot about it because we had a good business going. It was profitable back here. By then, it was booming. Well, I got a phone call about a month later. Come on down, sign the papers. Everything's all set. I said, well, just tell me what I owe, and I'll send you a check. No, you got to be down here. Well, I got down there, found out no one had any money. So I ended up buying or financing the whole thing. I gave each of them 5%, 4.9% it was, for $100 a piece, but they were to run it. And I didn't go there, I don't think, 4 or 5 times between the time we bought it until we had a fire that completely destroyed it. Well, everyone wanted to take their insurance money and run. I felt as a family owning that, we had an obligation because it was a major economic industry right within our state, and we ought to rebuild it. So I turned over the freight car operation, which had grown quite big, to others in the family, and I set about rebuilding the track. I never got back into the other, and so our company just kept growing. So now we're 100% owned by the family. It's fair size, and going pretty good.
And you have kept, however, all this time, your ideas of patriotism and belief in the country?
Well, I don't know if you'd call it patriotism. I understood what I was supposed to do as a citizen. I didn't really participate in any of the veteran type of affairs in there because I was too busy working. And then maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I started going. We were flying down to. Can't think of the name of the camp now. I should. Camp was in Georgia, the major.
Fort Benning.
Fort Benning. They were giving me an award down there, and I had the family with me, and they started asking about the war. Up until then, I didn't have time to think about it, didn't want to think about it because it brought back some bad memories as well as good. Since then, I started thinking about it. Gee, what am I doing not helping? And since then, I've tried to do whatever I can. And I'm on the board of the World War II Museum. We'd like to, we try to support whatever the veterans operate, because there was such a great lesson learned at World War II. It changed the whole world. And we were fortunate enough to be a part of that and living at that time. And I was fortunate enough not to get killed in one of the wars. And I thought I owed something back, and I was trying to put back what everyone had done for me and my family. So that's how we felt about it. I think my family feels pretty much the same way about it. We try to support these things because a lot of the people now hadn't experienced World War II. They didn't understand why we were fighting. They didn't understand that freedom doesn't come free. Now, that isn't my thing. That's what the Medal of Honor people keep saying, and they're right. And we take too much for granted now. We're too busy thinking of what's in it for me rather than what's in it for the people that make it available for me. And so there's a change to a certain extent in how a lot of people look at our management, our government, and the management of business. So I'm, I guess, the old-fashioned type.
How would you describe your leadership style and the basic precepts, going all the way back to, obviously, Morgan Park Academy? I mean, yours is a progression.
At the academy, we learned discipline. We learned that there is no such thing as second place. You win or you lose. You go into business, you take that with you. You go into combat, you take that with you. You get into business, you take that with you. Now, you have to then decide, and I'm not sure I really got through that hump. You've got a family over here. You're going to take all the leadership in the family. You got a business over here that's really very small, and you're making it big so you can support the group over here. Not only support that group, but their children and their children's children. Now, I'm learning it doesn't all mix together. You have to balance the thing out. I didn't balance as well as I could have, or as I should have. So we have some differences in the second, third, and fourth generation. We're down to 4 generations. I've got 13 great-grandchildren. So, and I really don't know them as well as I should know them because I've put too much effort into building for them. I've passed everything. I'm being 95, and I started way back when, so they wouldn't have to pay a lot of death taxes. No one thought I would live this long, but the longer I live, the farther I get away from the younger people's way of life and try to live the other part of the life, and the two really don't combine. And I hadn't taken the time really to understand as much of their way and teach them some of the way of my way. So I think that there's differences in different companies and in different families. Some were able to do it, but when you start with nothing and you build it high, it just doesn't come that way. You've got to work awfully hard. And all my life I've been on a 5-6 day week, from military academy, the service, and in business. And it's hard to sort of, well, it becomes a way of life. And I think you're reflected on the way of life. When you talk about leadership, I've learned a lot about leadership and building the company. Until the fire that burned the track down, I did one thing, and I stayed over there. There was a new generation that took leadership in our other company. It was 180 degrees different than what I had. I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong, and they're not saying it the other way around either. But you have different types of leadership. As I told you earlier, back in the war, they used to call, in training, behind my back, I'd be little Napoleon. But then when we got into combat, and we didn't lose men like some of the others did, then they gathered around and protected me. Now, what is the leadership? I don't know. I think leadership is how you measure at the end of the day, when you're going to put you in that box and set you down, what did you accomplish in the way of contributing to the world? Oh, you have to define leadership. I can't define it.
No, but you live it.
If I had to live over again, would I do it differently? Probably. I think almost anything you do, if you had to live it over again, you'd do it a little different. You'd do it better than you did the first time, because you're breaking new ground all the time. With the first time, you're learning, and you do it a little bit different the next time. And if you did it a third time, you'd still make it a little bit different. And I think it's difficult to keep up with the way the world is changing. We're in a computer age. I keep telling people I'm middle age. I'm too old to learn all that stuff on the computer. I'm too young to play golf, so I'm in the middle.
I understand that. I'm a terrible golfer. I don't even bother.
Well, you're not old enough yet.
Yeah. Do you still golf?
Do I? Not. I gave it up after a while because I didn't have time. If you don't have time to do a good job, and you're just dubbing along, you're wasting your time. I guess I don't like to be second.
No, I don't think you do.
Well,
But
I learned that in military academy. I learned that in the service. And I think that the difference between combat and business is very similar. It's very similar, but we don't look at it that way. But it's not similar in product. It's similar in tactics. But they haven't had the experience of the war part.
The
war is a dirty, ugly thing. And you hear and see the glamour part of it. You don't see the other part of it.
There really isn't any glamour part of it in my...
There isn't any glamour part. You know,
in my view.
If my dog gets cut in his foot, I look the other way. I'd make the worst doctor in the world. I saw enough of guts and glory type thing. I don't ever want to see it again, and it sticks in my mind. I just really, my wife will tell me about this, that, and the next thing that someone's having. I don't have any idea what they're talking about. I had my first heart attack. My wife died in 1980 of cancer. And then I went in 81, was the first bypass. And I've had heart trouble ever since. I've had cancer, 8, 9 years. It's under control. My heart, I've had all sorts of operations and stuff. I think you can live through those things, but I've had enough of medical stuff in my life. I don't want to see any more about it. I don't even want to hear about it. And other people want to get into it and understand it. I don't.
I understand.
That doesn't mean I'm right and they're wrong. It means that I just don't understand it.
What are you doing with the World War II Museum? That's in New Orleans, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm a trustee. That's what about the only thing I'm doing with it. We make some donations to it and things like that.
I've never been there. Is it moving forward?
Everyone should see it. And it's not all completed yet. There are still donations coming. We've gone through from pre-war, World War II, through the different phases of the war. And each phase, this is a working museum. I call it a university, not a museum. It's not displays, it's an active part of the thing. And when you go through, you'll see the scenery and so forth, not a bunch of cases. And you can put on your earphones and you'll hear somebody who has been there telling you what it's like in those particular places. And that goes all the way through, right through to the end of the war. Now when the campus is completed, we'll have the roof over now. It's about another 2 years before all of that stuff gets completed. But it's been open wrong. When you go through there, and it's just jammed now. It's just absolutely jammed. People come from all over the world to see it. And it's something everyone should see because you're seeing World War II as it really was. You're not seeing the glossy thing, you're not seeing the blood and guts and that part in it, but you're not seeing all the polished glamour of it either. There's every sort of a plane that fought in the war, there's every sort of a uniform, there's and the scenery and the talking as you're going through. You actually walk on, it isn't sand, but it feels like sand, the beaches as they're coming in. you see all the, and you've got your earphones on if you want them, and you're listening to somebody that was there telling you about what it is. So it's not a bunch of just exhibits. And you've got lessons down there. You can go to school on some of these things. We have people that are from around the country that go down there to learn. We don't pick them out. The schools pick them out. Then they go over to Normandy, where we have a place. They go over and see the beaches. They come back and teach the kids back in high school what's happening. Somewhat similar to what the Medal of Honor people do, except we go into it a little bit deeper. We have more money than they do for doing that, because there's scholarships and people have donated a lot more to it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, it's something everyone should see. I keep saying if CNN had been on the beaches and at some of the battles that were over at World War II, we wouldn't have war now. It's a dirty, there is no glamour to it, none whatsoever. And the magazines and books and movies that show the glamour, I just don't read them anymore. I just sort of throw them away. Because that isn't what it was all about.
I never have watched them.
Well, the last movie I saw was Saving Private Ryan, and that was very realistic. As my wife asked me when we came out, she said, "Is that how it really was?" I said, all but for one thing. In the movie, you didn't smell the blood, the guts, the ammunition, the smoke, and hear the same noises. Other than that, that's how it was.
For Vietnam, I think, for the Cav, it's when we were soldiers.
Yeah.
And the mobile and the attacks.
I didn't see the Band of Brothers in some of those, because I had no desire to see any more, but I had had enough. Just like the medical stuff. I had seen enough of it. I didn't want to see any more.
Have you been to Cantini?
I haven't. They keep inviting me down, and I guess I could make the time. I just haven't found the time to get down there.
It's interesting.
I want to get down there and see it.
It's worth seeing, particularly since outside of the museum buildings, they've got tanks that you would recognize.
The newer ones from World War II?
Yes. They have World War II tanks there.
I like to go. Shermans, I imagine.
Yes. And I can't tell you all that was there, because I was strictly a ground pounder.
Well, I'll get down there this coming summer.
It's worth.
Because I'm running out of time.
Well, you're not running out of things you can contribute, and that's what's important. And you're still making a contribution, and hopefully this video, which is, in my opinion, is more than people worth people watching.
You know, John, I think, and I can't stop admiring people that will do what the Pritzkers have done and the other people and everything. This is part of the history that everyone should know about. If we're going to be American citizens, if we're going to preserve our way of life, we know that there's a cost to it. And that cost is generally war. And people that are saying we're spending too much on defense, I think it was George Washington said, the way you prevent war is be prepared stronger than anyone else. And he was so right. And we have too many, I guess you'd call it independent thinkers, and we have too many people that really don't understand the American way. They really don't understand how hard it was to get to where we are. They just assume that everything, they were born with the thing, entitlement. I think a word ought to be taken out of the dictionary. But too many people feel they have an entitlement. And if they could only get down to work and understand those things, and maybe places like the Pritzker Museum can bring them into the point, because here you have all these books, but you've got to do more than books. You can read about it here, but then you should see it at places like World War II Museum. You should go to the Air Museum in Washington and see what it is there. You should understand how many people have given up their lives to preserve our way. And if those people that gave up their lives to preserve our way could see some of the things that are happening now, they'd roll over in their grave.
I'm sure you have seen what they're doing with the Army Museum.
I haven't seen that.
I haven't been there either, but I've been a contributor, and I buy the brick, you know, I mean, I participate. I joined, when they asked me to join the board here, I jumped at it for the very reason that you're describing. People don't get it,
Yeah.
you know, and just watching.
Well, but I find, and I don't like to talk much about the war, other than to people that have been there. How do you describe that? How do you describe that you're running along and the artillery goes over like that, and when it hits there, you know, it goes out, there's a space of maybe 8 to 10 yards from how it goes over. You turn around and tell your runner, and you look for him. You've ducked, and you think he has, and he's no longer there, and you just see parts going. How do you describe things like that? You don't. How do you describe some of the other things that you see and feel? You can't tell somebody about it, and you don't want to. You want to forget them, but they don't. They get back in that. You know, I think that your mind was put together well before the computer was, and that mind becomes a computer, and sometimes you can pull things out and sometimes you can't. But there's things that get indelibly stuck in that mind, and you don't like to think about them. But sometimes it's good to think about them because it straightens you out.
And it's good to do a oral history like you're doing.
Well,
is extremely important.
If you do an oral history, I start thinking about things I hadn't thought about for a long time. It brings a lot of things back to you.
And they're important.
Yeah. It's a small world because I run into people every now and then whose fathers or brothers, sometimes sons, were there. But I don't run into many veterans from World War II anymore.
They're all gone, and there are hardly any veterans.
I'm not living longer than they lived. I was just younger than they were when I went in.
You were 20, 19?
Well, I was 19 when we
19
went in.
when you went in.
Yeah.
And when you got out, you were 22 maybe?
23.
23?
Even my birthday was in October, and I went in pretty quick. I would just turn 19, or 19 in October when I went in. But I wasn't the only one. There were a lot of them that did that.
No question.
I was fortunate that my folks had sent me to a military camp, not to get ready for war. I went there, it just happened to be.
For the discipline.
Things fell on. No, it was going to a private school where the classes were very small, rather than going to a public school where the classes. I wasn't a very good student. I was there to get an education, to get to college. My folks knew that I'd be goofing around if I were in high school, if I had the opportunity. I wasn't disciplined, it was just a way. My brothers went there too.
Well, that's good, but you've contributed an awful lot, Dick, if I may say.
Well, I don't know if I've contributed. I've tried to do what I can do, and I've done as best I can. I'd like to give more, but I don't have more to give.
You've contributed a lot,
Well,
and I hope that this.
I don't look at it as a contribution. I look at it as my responsibility.
Want to give your final words that you want people to remember about this video, Dick?
Boy, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. Any final words? The video, I'm just trying to tell you how I feel. That doesn't mean other people feel that way, but I think most of my generation that had the opportunity to fight for their country in the way we did, in the way the country supported the people that were doing the fighting, it united our people. And right now, our country isn't united. And we shouldn't have to have a war to unite it. It should be something that we do because we have to do it to save our country. To a degree, we may be in a war with ourselves at this particular point. And if we just could get back to united, it would work out. We're no different in war than we are in business or in our regular life. If we aren't working together, we're all going to come apart. There are no winners the way we're going at this particular point now. We may think this group over here won, or that group over there won, or this group over here prevented something, but we have to learn to live together. And if it takes a war, it takes a war, but the only way we're going to prevent a war is be together and be stronger than the other guy. I don't go pick on you, you're bigger than I am. So I better get an army.
You would if you needed to.
Well,
Because it's the spirit that you have that's important.
Well, I think if you have a real strong position in the defense, and it's logical, and it's not trying to conquer everyone else, no bully's going to pick on you. And we have to be the nation that's strong and built up and with a good defense, so any bully isn't going to come and try and knock us over. They know that they aren't going to do it. I don't pick on guys that are bigger than I am. I'm afraid of them.
I want to thank you on behalf of the Pritzker Library for what you've done for us, and more importantly, what you've done for your country.
Well,
thank you.
I certainly appreciate you saying it, but I want to thank you for what the Pritzker Library and for what you're doing and for all the other people, because you're making everything available for people to understand it. You're putting it in a simple, common language, and that's what we need today. We overcomplicate things.
Pritzker Military Presents is made possible by members of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library and its sponsors. The views and opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the museum and library. The preceding program was produced by the Pritzker Military Museum and Library.